Welcome board members and guests to the Wednesday, March 22nd, 2023 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. Public comment, I know. After I open an item for public comment, please, those joining us by Zoom webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button on the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you are joining over the phone, you can press *9. PCTPA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during this meeting, please email your comments to solvisable at ssabol@pctpa.net. Thank you. Jim, would you like to lead us in the pledge?
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Okay, roll call. Let's see.
Broadway.
Here.
Burris.
Here.
Cartwright.
Here.
Dowden Calvillo.
Present.
Holmes.
Here.
Howdeshelt not here. Joyner.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Wilkins.
Here.
All right.
Okay, very good. Item C, agenda review.
Madam Chair, the agenda is the same, so no new items.
Okay, great. Item D, we don't have to approve the agenda, do we? No. Okay.
No.
Item D, AB 2449.
Yeah, so we're under a new assembly bill starting this month. So under AB 2449, this item is a standing placeholder on the agenda. Should the board need to consider approval of any director's request to participate remotely under AB 2449, emergency circumstance exceptions. All board members are present today or participating remotely with public access. Therefore, we do not need to take any action, and we can move on to the next item.
Okay, very good. Item E, approval of action minutes from February 22nd, 2023.
Madam Chair, I'll move approval of the minutes.
Holmes will second.
Okay, hearing first and a second. Roll call.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cartwright.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Yes.
Joyner.
Yes.
Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, item F, public comment. Persons may address the board on items not on this agenda. Please limit comments to 3 minutes. Nope. Okay, very. No public comment, wow. Move on
quickly.
Okay, item G, the consent calendar, Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without discussion. Any board member, staff member, or interested citizen may request an item be removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Anybody care to?
I have none.
Okay,
Move consent.
Second.
okay, roll call.
Today.
We are fast, huh?
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Cartwright.
Aye.
Dowden Calvillo.
Aye.
Holmes.
Aye.
Howdeshelt.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, moving on to item H, congestion mitigation and air quality, CMAQ, and surface transportation block grant, STBG, revised program funding estimates and project programming recommendations. Mike, take it away. Oh, this
Right.
says
Good morning.
Mike on here.
It does. It's got Mike and myself
Mike,
listed.
okay. Sorry, Rick.
No worries. Mike and I put a lot of work into this, but I'm doing the presentation this
Good,
morning.
thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. So the item before you has got 3 recommendations. We're looking to adopt revised funding estimates, approve the projects to be funded, and then a direction to staff to work with our partners on programming these items into the MTIP. So a little bit of background. In August, we came to the board and we had a funding estimate approved for $16.6 million. That was based on the estimates that we had from the state at that time. We did a call for projects, started the process for our partner agencies to apply. And this was all kind of done under the uncertainty with the FHWA corrective action regarding the funding program for CMAQ and STBG, and whether or not moving into the future, PCTPA would continue its kind of historic role of running those funding programs. So in November, we got 18 applications for about $32 million. Mike Costa and myself and a member from SACOG went through and did the review, and you may recall we noted that we were going to delay the results of that until we got results from the ATP program, because Roseville Dry Creek project had applied into both, and we thought it was a very strong candidate for that other program and wanted to wait for those results. In December, the state provided new fund estimates for those funding sources that resulted in a little increase in funding. And in January, we also got confirmation that Placer's becoming part of the SACOG 6-county process. So based on those two things, we did think it was kind of prudent for us to revise the fund estimates for those increases and allow Placer County agencies to kind of take full advantage of those additional funds that are available. So that's kind of a little bit of the back history with this. So what's shown here is the revised funding estimate for CMAQ. It's increasing about $2.75 million. Mike, if you can advance. So with the new state estimates, you can see in here the FY 2020 to 2022, there's a negative value. We had overprogrammed originally in that program back in 2017. So there's kind of a negative value that we need to correct for. But with the increased funding that's available, overall, we end up with a $2.7 million increase in CMAQ funding. So we're going to take advantage and program that. Next slide, Mike. So for the STBG funding, it's much more modest increase. It's only about $310,000. But again, we'd like to take advantage of that as well in programming. Next slide. So this shows the performance-based recommendations for 14 projects. It's kind of a simplified version of attachment 2 in the memo. Would like to note that we fully funded every agency's top priority request, kind of with a little asterisk for the Dry Creek Greenway because it got the ATP grant funding. Roseville said they did not need that entire amount of the original request because they got those other fundings and would prefer to see those funds go to some of their other priorities. So as a team, we went through and ranked and scored these into kind of high, medium, and low groups, went through and funded those requests up at the top until we got kind of near the bottom and had to make some decisions. All this was kind of done in concert with our partner agencies, talking with them. You may have noticed there was some fund reprogramming in the consent calendar. Part of that is as a result of what's funded here and some decisions to kind of move some dollars around to take advantage of the funding and the fund types in terms of we have some projects that could use CMAQ funds but couldn't use STBG, that sort of thing. So we did a little fund shifting around. But these are the funding recommendations on the performance side. From the rural STBG apportionment and discretionary funding options, so the top 3 listed on this table is the rural apportionment of STBG. There's a long-standing agreement going back to 1999 about how the rural STBG funds are apportioned. So this follows that agreement. Those funds going to Auburn, the county, and to Colfax. The bottom 3 on the list is the discretionary, what we often refer to as kind of the off-the-top funding, where we have funds that go to Freeway Service Patrol, Congestion Mitigation Program, and the Regional Spare the Air Program. I did want to note, as shown here, back in 2019, PCTPA loaned funds to the city of Auburn. They had a project that came in over bid. And so there was a loan with them so they could fully fund that project, and agreement that those funds would be paid back. So between the last funding round and this funding round, that loan has been fully repaid. We had to do a little shuffling around of funds On the PCTPA side, those funds originally came from the Highway 49 project, and then we needed to move funds from Freeway Service Patrol and congestion mitigation so we could move the 49 project forward. So those repayments are going back into the Freeway Service Patrol and the congestion mitigation program. So next slide.
Could you tell me what the total amount of that loan was? Do you remember? You can tell me offhand.
Yeah, I want to say roughly about 350,000 plus or minus, and with this, it's about 184,000. That's the final,
Okay,
kind of the final payoff.
thank you.
So this is just the slide is just a summary of the dollars by agency, showing how much each agency is receiving out of this funding program between the two fund types. I'll note that this is, all these recommendations have been discussed with all the agencies. It went through the TAC, supported by the TAC. Very much a collaborative effort between PCTPA and all of the agencies to figure out how best to fund all the projects. And with that, our requested actions to adopt the revised funding estimate, to approve the project funding recommendations, and direct staff to work with SACOG and those agencies to program it into the MTIP. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Madam Chair, I have another question, just really quickly. The $492,955 for Auburn, is $184,687 coming out of that 492, or was that 184 already taken out before the 492 is being allocated?
It was taken out before.
Okay,
So
great,
this is,
thank you.
yeah, that's a net.
And then the only other question I had was, did Auburn not submit a performance-based request?
They did not. They wanted all the funds to go basically into pavement rehab, and it was fundable in this manner.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the clarification. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Yeah, a couple quick. Just curious about Freeway Service Patrol. What are we offering within that? I know that with the advent of cell phones and the elimination of, freeway calling boxes and such, we do less and less.
Yeah. So the assumptions here, because this is funding going out through 2028. It's an assumption of the continuation of the services that we're providing now. We have an existing contract that expires, I'm looking to Sylvia, I believe into 2024. So we've assumed basically a continuation of those services with an allowance for inflation.
Sure, but
in there.
I guess what I'm asking is what services are we now providing? I know we were
What
doing
level of
something
service?
through the Narrows for a while, but beyond that.
I'm going to look to Sylvie, who
Sure.
runs that program.
So we provide service on I-80 from the Sac County line all the way down to the 49 off-ramp there, Monday through Friday, and during the commute hours. And then we do on SR 65 from all the way down to 12 Bridges, Monday through Friday. So we don't provide Sunday service anymore. That's one thing, but
So is it purely an on-call service at this point? Or
no, it's
patrol?
just, so it's from 6 to 10, and then from 2:30 to 6:30, I believe. Trying to make sure I'm right there. So it's just during those commute hours.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. And the other quick question was, industrial has been listed low on the list, and I understand that it's not a top priority, but it's a pretty torn up road, and with the venue coming into play now, 4,500 seats being filled almost every night at this point. I filled one of those seats. Yes, you did. I think moving into the future, we need to take into account the increased volume of traffic that's going to be hitting that, and it's already, quite frankly, very, very substandard. It was so bad it was closed for a number of years, and all we did was take the barriers down and call it good, but it's in pretty bad shape. So I understand why it's low priority now, but we might want to take a look at that again. As more of a regional thing, quite honestly, because the venue is a regional draw.
Yeah, understood.
That's true. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Okay, any other questions by any of our board members on?
Madam Chair, I'll move approval of the item.
Howard Schultz, seconds.
Okay, roll call then.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Cartwright. Dowden Calfeo.
Aye.
Holmes. Howardisht.
Aye.
Joyner.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, very good. Moving right along. Item I, Regional Transportation Plan 2050, Round 1, Community Outreach Summary. So we have Corey Peterson and Mike Costa.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. It's good to be here. Glad to hopefully have a break in the rain here pretty soon. We, as many of you may know, we've been doing our regional transportation plan update for about a year now, but it's actually been a while since staff has come back to the board to actually talk about it. And this will be kind of the first in probably a few presentations that we'll be giving here in the next few months to start to talk about the community outreach that we did last fall for the RTP and some of our goals and objectives and how we can incorporate equity into our RTP as well, which Mike will kind of get into a little bit later. What we'd like to do now is just summarize some of the community outreach that we did last fall. From about roughly October to December, we did a comprehensive outreach effort where we were trying to go to the public and ask them what their transportation priorities are and really kind of get down and understand, what sort of priorities we should be looking at in our RTP based on what our community says. So to that end, we did an online survey. We held a couple virtual workshops, held an in-person event at our offices. We held several pop-up events across all of the jurisdictions, and then we came to all of the city and town councils and the board of supervisors and set up a project website to help promote all the efforts. So the online survey was open for about 2 months. We had it in English and Spanish. It received just over 1,100 responses, with the majority being from zip codes in Placer County. We got the most responses mostly from West Roseville, Lincoln, and Auburn. And this map kind of shows a little bit of the distribution of the survey responses. So you can see we had a pretty wide distribution across the county, with some of the more concentrated responses in the southwest portion around Lincoln and Roseville. So the survey came in three parts. The first part we were trying to get at is we gave the public a list of priorities, such as, would you like to see congestion on your local roads reduced? Would you like to see more commuting options like carpooling and transit? Do you want to see more investments to help support movement of freight, either rail or truck? And we wanted people to then rank these priorities and pick their top 5, so we could see what their top priorities are. And so what we found was that the top 3 priorities were all related to either fixing potholes or reducing congestion. Not an entirely surprising result, but it's still good to kind of see nonetheless. We are seeing that the top priority was reducing congestion on local arterials, followed closely by highway congestion on 80 and 65 primarily. So then the next part was kind of a fun interactive exercise where the public got to basically take these kind of proverbial coins that had a point value and then assign them to different budget categories. So we said if we gave you coins that totaled, I think it was about $50, so to speak, how would you spend your transportation budget? And so again, we gave them kind of similar type of categories. Would you use your money to widen our highways? Would you fix potholes? Would you build more commuter trains or put in more buses? And again, kind of similar theme. Most people were interested in reducing congestion and fixing potholes. So we're starting to see a consistent message here. Within that, then we had 5 categories where we asked people to drill down even further and said, okay, so within our highways, what sort of strategies would you like to see us prioritize when addressing highway congestion or when addressing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure? For highways, again, adding lanes and fixing potholes, top priorities. When we're looking specifically at our local roads, we saw quite a bit of people that would like to see more signal timing upgrades that help kind of bring smoother flow to roads without necessarily adding capacity, as well as fixing potholes. when looking at public transit. So this one is interesting because what we were trying to do with this question is there's always kind of the, in transit, there's kind of a tug and pull between providing more frequency and providing a wider coverage of service. Sometimes you can't always do both. So what we were trying to do is to kind of understand if the public was given a choice, would you choose a wider range of service, like serving more locations, or would you choose kind of more concentrated lines with more frequent service? What we found was that more people preferred a wider coverage of service, and also looking at app-based services like microtransit, which I understand is launching here pretty soon in Placer County. So just kind of more on the looking at kind of more options for where they could take transit versus how often they could take it. For biking and walking, people are interested in seeing more separated sidewalks and bike lanes from the roadways, as opposed to kind of that traditional bike lane that puts you right up next to traffic, as well as looking at safe routes to school improvements, so better sidewalks and crosswalks around schools. And then the last one is kind of looking at we call it environment and systems management projects. So projects that would help to use existing capacity in our roadways or would help to promote environmental quality, like carpooling and van pooling incentives, or managed toll lanes, incentives to ride transit. Again, signal timing, which essentially just helps traffic flow better on local roads, came up pretty highly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike. He's going to talk about some of our workshops.
Thank you, Corey, and good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. As Corey mentioned, we held several different events, both at PCTPA's office virtually and at pop-up events throughout the region. On December 6th and 8th, we held 2 virtual workshops. They were exactly mirrored in the same fashion, where we presented information about the RTP. We polled participants in those workshops about their top priorities in a similar fashion to the way that the survey was set up. So we were asking very similar questions about overall priorities, as well as concentrated priorities within those 5 categories that Corey mentioned. And in the December 6th workshop, congestion was something that rose to the top as a priority for participants in that virtual workshop. And then surprisingly, in December 8th, the topic of I would say priority to the participants was local transit. So that was something that came to the top for the participants in the virtual workshop on the 8th. On our in-person workshop, again, this was set up in a similar fashion. We held this at PCTPA's offices here in Auburn, set up in the same way that the survey was designed to measure overall priorities as well as concentrated priorities within the 5 subcategories, where we had boards and we had people put dots on the board, and participants were interacting with us to ask questions about the different subjects that were presented on the board. And the overall results of the in-person workshop mirrored and reflected a lot of the results that we saw on the electronic surveys in terms of priorities for local road improvements, widening of highways, and even in some cases local transit improvements. Our pop-up events we held, one of the success strategies that we identified was actually going out into the community rather than having the community come to us. So with that notion, we did attend several different events that were already pre-scheduled by your local jurisdictions, such as tree lighting events since it was the holiday season, and in some cases local events even at Sierra College, where we had information about the RTP to promote the survey and also to address any questions that are coming from the populations that were at those events. And then one of the things that is important to note is roughly, based on our estimates, we did have a clicker for most of the time. We interacted and engaged directly with over 380 people in our pop-up events, where we are interacting and addressing questions as well as promoting the regional transportation plan at these events. And then finally, as Corey mentioned earlier, we did go make a traveling roadshow to all of the jurisdictions, mostly to the city councils, except for the case of the city of Roseville. We did attend their transportation commission to present the RTP, to promote the survey, and to inform the locally elected governing bodies about the RTP process and our outreach strategy. And then we did attend also the Truckee North Tahoe TMA board. Everything was promoted on our website. As we brought to this board a couple different times last year, we did create a unique website that has information about the RTP. It is still live. That website is our tool to update all future outreach events and engagement strategies will be put onto our website so that people can go to one location to access any surveys, to access the results of our surveys, and to also interact with us if they have questions or if they need to review any of the documents that we are presenting along this multi-year process. Finally, I'm not going to go through all of these numbers, but we did have a very high participation rate on our survey, which we're very proud of. In terms of our outreach strategy, we worked with our then consultant AIM to engage or at least push materials out to several thousands of people. We did that through a variety of different means, and so we reached out to close to over 30,000 people in terms of all the materials and pushes that we did with information during just this single round of engagement. We produced a video. I hope you all got a chance to see that video that Corey and I voiced. It's now on IMDb, and we're, I think, licensed actors now. But anyway, I think that that was a fun little engagement strategy that we wanted to, again, bring awareness about this this effort that we're trying to do. And then, of course, with your help, we had some op-eds and press releases that were released throughout the process.
If you're not paying your dues, you are not in the actors union.
No. And what's coming next? Corey kind of alluded to this earlier in the presentation. One of the things that we're going to be looking at over the next couple of months at a staff level is dissecting those results further and pairing them or looking at how the results of our survey and our first round of engagement can feed into updated RTP goals, policies, and objectives to guide our planning process moving forward. So we're going to be looking at that over the next couple of months. We're going to be looking at how potentially to portray equity in our region. We're doing some research on what metrics make sense for our region in terms of the lens of equity, which is something we have to look at for our regional transportation plan. And then, of course, we're going to be working with our partners at the Sacramento Area Council of Governments in their blueprint effort process, which right now they're actually doing an outreach push from March to June to conduct outreach on different regional priorities in the six-county region that involves not just transportation, but housing and life benefits as well. And they're they will, yeah, actually. And so we're working with SACOG on that as well. But we will be bringing back more information and more items for discussion at the board level, hopefully in May, to talk about equity and goals, objectives, and priorities, and then subsequently in later months throughout this process. So with that, that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Okay, questions?
Yeah, no questions really, but a couple of observations. Your polling results, I think, are very reflective of everything that I'm seeing out there, certainly. But if you put that up against the state's priorities, those are very different things. And our customers are voters, right? Our citizens. And the state is behaving in a way in which they are their own customers, creating these agendas that maybe if you poll in San Francisco and LA, you're going to see something more in alignment with what the state is doing. But it's good to have my perceptions reaffirmed by the polling that we've got moving forward, and useful data to take with us down to SACOG and say, hey, look, this is what our folks are looking at. And while you don't want to have capacity added, they do. They feel that is part of the solution for Placer County. Let's have that conversation. The other thing I'm pleased to see is that you're trying to flesh out what equity means for Placer County. We just had our first funding round meeting down at SACOG, and it was a little uncomfortable. I had to bring up the question of equity, and there was a bit of pushback in the room, trying to define what equity means for our efforts there. So this will be useful there as well. Thank you for that.
I think if you look back at our two census measures, over the last two census measures, this county has grown over almost 160,000 people. And we're going to continue to grow because we're the most popular county, I think, around. So we can't maintain the same roads that we've had 20 years ago. We have to grow in many ways. And so I'm thinking too that looking at this survey kind of feeds right into what we have to do to pursue the measure coming up. People are asking for exactly what we're telling them that we're trying to accomplish.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Joyner's comments triggered, is there a statewide survey of, that would be,
That would be wonderful.
you can answer offline, but it would really be interesting, right?
Oh, I'm sure
To compare, because I noted exactly what Commissioner Joyner noted, you know, when you get to the EVs, those coins, they were probably breaking those coins up into, you know.
Pieces of 8.
Yeah, right, because that was pretty low on, right, the thing. So I'd just be curious, and doesn't have to be answered now, but, you know.
Well, I'll just quickly pop in and say, I don't know about the statewide survey. It's easy enough for us to investigate and find that out for you relative if there's something that Caltrans is doing or if there's some sort of synthesis effort that occurs via CalCog. I mean, obviously, this is something we do as part of our efforts. All of the other R2PAs are going to do it, certainly the federalized MPOs. So it wouldn't take a lot of work for us to look at, for instance, what SCAG is doing, right? I mean, SCAG as an MPO is larger than, 22 states in the U.S., just that one. So if we look at SCAG, LA Metro, MTC, we can what SACOG's doing, we can get a sense of that. So, yeah, we'll look into that as far as also if there's anything Caltrans is doing statewide.
Yeah. So I think what Bruce is looking for is exactly what we just got here, not what SCAG is doing, but what SCAG's customers.
That's what I'm meaning to say. Yeah, what the data reflects, and just without editorializing, I would say, I think, Mayor Joyner, you would find is a lot of what the folks are asking for. I would guess, and there's not a lot of value in guessing, but is going to look probably actually more similar to what our customers are saying as well. Yeah. They want road quality. They don't want to have their cars banged up and things like that. And they do want capacity improvement. So we'll take that action and bring that back to you. It's a great comment. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, moving on to item J, presentation. Pardon?
Public comment on this?
Oh, forgot about the public comment.
No public comment here.
Okay, then we will move on to item J, presentation. Sacramento-Reno Rail Study, First Last Mile Analysis, and Public Interest Survey. Corey?
Good morning again.
Good morning.
So this is a topic. There's no action on this item today, but that we wanted to bring before the board just to kind of give an update and talk about some of the work we've been doing in the space of rail planning and looking at an extension of the Capital Corridor from the terminus in Auburn up to Reno. So this is a study that's primarily been led by Caltrans, and just to kind of give some of the background on how this kind of got started, there's been many efforts over the years to plan for an extension of passenger rail up to Reno beyond the current one round trip that there is today. The most recent effort was that PCTPA last year put together a grant application to the state to do essentially a feasibility study for extending the Capital Corridor up to Reno. And Caltrans reviewed the application and decided that they liked the idea and decided they offered to lead the study and fund it. So they kind of focused on that. They hired a consultant. They hired Jacobs to help put that study together and look at what sort of improvements would be needed to make the service happen. So they looked primarily at kind of coordinating with the stakeholders along the route. They looked at, working with Union Pacific, who owns the tracks up over Donner Summit along the corridor, to see how that would interact with their freight services, what sort of station capacity increases would be needed, if there's any track improvements that would be needed, what sort of train storage needs would be needed. Once the trains get up to Reno, they got to sleep overnight somewhere, so they need to figure out, is there a place in Reno where that can actually happen, and kind of get a kind of high level cost estimates and timelines for what it would take to make that happen. So concurrent to that, since we had kind of we as an agency had put this grant application together, we had been in discussions with quite a few number of other agencies in the region to kind of put together matching funds to help make this application happen. So our leadership said, hey, let's not let this money go to waste. Let's put it to another use. And so we kind of, talked with the stakeholders, with Caltrans, and decided to do a analysis on first last mile connections to each of the stations that are in Placer, Nevada, and Washoe counties, to do a public interest survey on the Reno Rail extension and to kind of help promote the idea of having this extension up to Reno. So PCTPA led that effort, and when complete, it'll be integrated into the Caltrans study. So what's included in first last mile, or why even study it? So first last mile kind of refers to the problem where you take the train, from, let's say you go from here down to the Bay Area, and you're now in San Francisco, and then you get off the train, and then what happens? So you got to get to your destination somehow. Most people, it's probably not going to be right upstairs from your train station. You're probably going to have to travel some distance to get to your destination. And so this kind of, gets to the heart of what we're trying to look at to help encourage the use of the service is, once you get up to Reno, once you get up to Tahoe, especially if you're in Truckee and want to go to the ski resorts. Well, the ski resorts, last time I checked, are not right outside the Truckee station. You got to, travel some distance to get to the slopes. So we're trying to look at what are ways that we can help facilitate connections between, the train station and ski resorts, casinos, employment centers, restaurants, et cetera, wherever it is that people need to go. And so that includes, a bunch of different methods that could be done to do that. It could be bus transit, looking at a ride-hailing service like Uber or Lyft, microtransit, which is already being done in a lot of places along the route, bike share or scooter share, which I know a lot of people have a love-hate relationship with those scooters, bicycle and pedestrian access, and also looking at ways to kind of encourage more carpooling. So like I said, we focused on the stations that are currently along the route between, that are in Placer, Nevada, and Washoe counties. So we looked at Roseville, Rockland, Auburn, Colfax, Truckee, Reno, and then we also looked at kind of the area around the Sparks Thruway bus station. There used to be a passenger rail station in Sparks many years ago, but it closed in about 1999. So we kind of looked at a high level at the area around the former Sparks station. So the other thing that we did was we put together a public interest survey and kind of put that out to the world and had our partner agencies in Northern California and Northern Nevada help promote it, all on social media. We didn't buy any paid ads, but we got almost 6,000 responses to the survey. I was expecting about 1,500, and we reached that on about day 2. So we were pretty happy with the response. Had a good reach. We got a lot of responses from the Truckee area and from kind of up in that mountain communities area, and a strong response from right here in Placer as well as Nevada counties and in the Sacramento and the Bay Area. So just to kind of go over some of the survey results. So I want to preface this by saying that one of the things we were trying to do with the survey is we weren't just trying to understand, would you even want to use the service? We wanted people to understand, if you were to take the train up to Reno, here's some things you need to know. You might be carrying your skis. There might be weather delays. It's going to take you 5-6 plus hours, especially if you're coming from San Francisco. It could take even longer. We didn't want to necessarily give the impression of, you get on the train and you're there a couple hours later. So we tried to kind of lay the survey out in a detailed way that kind of portrayed that scenario and said, given all these circumstances, would you still be willing to try the train? Most people said yes. A lot of people would be willing to take skis, snowboards on the train, put it in a luggage car, and take it up to the slopes, primarily for recreational reasons. But we also saw a lot of people that just want to avoid traffic. I know most all of you know traffic sucks, especially when it's snowing like it is right now. Yes, it is.
It's an acronym.
Technical. Transportation jargon.
So we kind of tried to get, look at some of those broader questions, but also drill down a little bit as well to some of the more specific first last mile services, and looked at, what sort of services would people be willing to try? If there was bike share, would people be willing to use that? If there were, microtransit services, we even asked about autonomous shuttles, the little guys that just like kind of roll around little campuses, and would you be even willing to get on one of those? So we saw that, at least for active modes, most people are looking at, wanting better bike and ped access around stations. Microtransit was really popular. Resort shuttles, also very popular, to take people directly from the train up to the slopes, and also wanting to look at some ride sharing incentives, get people to carpool to and from the station. We also I'm not gonna read all this. This is a lot of information, but we also broke the survey results down by region. This was something that our plan development team, which had agencies all up and down the corridor, asked for. We wanted to see if we broke out the responses by people who lived in the Bay Area versus Sacramento versus the Tahoe Truckee region and Reno, would the responses be different? In a lot of cases, they weren't too different, but there were some pretty interesting differences, mainly that the Bay Area and mountain community residents are really interested in avoiding traffic. Sacramento region residents really want a scenic ride up to Reno. And then, probably not surprisingly, mountain community residents are mostly going to use this for personal reasons, visiting family and friends, going to appointments, less so for the recreation service that would be used by the Bay Area folks and Sacramento folks. So then, kind of getting into the first last mile analysis, we developed a report that kind of breaks down each of the study stations and talks about the existing land use and the existing services around the station. If there's anything planned in a city's general plan, bicycle pedestrian plan, short range transit plan, anything that's planned kind of in the near term, we also noted that as well. And then the kind of the meat of the report was, we came up with a set of what we call considerations. We're kind of stopping short of recommendations because these are very high level. The Reno rail service, this could be a long ways off. A lot could change at these locations before we get around to actually implementing the service, if it ever happens. So we wanted to kind of keep it high level, keep it flexible so that agencies would be able to study the recommendations further, especially for more specific things like new crosswalks that would need to be reviewed by an engineer. But in any case, we came up with considerations. First, we came up with some that were applied to all the stations, and these were things like looking at incentive programs to help to ride TNCs, like an Uber or Lyft pilot program. There's a lot of places in the Bay Area that have been doing that for commuters to help kind of get people to and from train stations, offering first-time riders a discounted ticket, or even wayfinding maps around the stations, installing electric car charging stations, and putting in maps of the surrounding transit services. But then we also came up with kind of some considerations for each station specifically, and that's where we got a little bit more granular and started looking at bicycle and pedestrian access and potential bus and shuttle services. So next steps, so we are actually getting ready to wrap up the report here pretty soon. We've been working closely with Caltrans and kind of keeping tabs on their study as well, and we'll be integrating this into their study. Their study is out for review right now, so we're working on reviewing it and getting comments to them as well. So the next steps for them, I know that they're looking at, potential going into, the environmental phase and kind of looking at next steps for the Reno Rail service if they're able to identify funding. So that's all I have, and I'll leave you with this nice little pretty picture of train riding through what I'm sure is a lot more snow up there now than there is in that picture. Just a little. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I do have a couple questions. Thank you very much. I found this very informative. I have had the opportunity to take the snow train, and we actually got off in Truckee. And we took an Uber to the resort, but then we couldn't get an Uber back in time the next day to catch the train. So that was a problem for us, and we ended up staying an extra day and having to stay in downtown Truckee in order to catch that next train back to Colfax. So I think it's a great idea. I just would really encourage the resorts to have some of those micro-transit, shuttles and things like that, because it's kind of tough to ride your bike with skis or, a suitcase. Oh, yeah, suitcase. And Ubers, that's the market prevails, so, but. No, probably not, Mayor. Well, thank you. I appreciate the confidence, but I don't know. I had my mother and my daughter in tow, so I would probably have to pull them in a sled, and that would be difficult. But in any event, excited to see this move forward, the study anyway, and to get additional data. And really very surprised to see the number of participants. Like you said, you were thinking about 1,500, and then you got almost 6,000 folks. But I think it's great, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I agree with Alice. I've taken the route all the way up to Reno. And the first thing is I absolutely agree on the resort-sponsored shuttles. Obviously, they're going to have racks for skis and everything else that microtransit isn't probably going to provide. But with respect to the route, my experience was you don't mind that it takes longer as long as you're still moving. You keep moving.
And you can eat on the train.
You can eat and you can move around, right? That's all good.
You can sleep.
You can sleep. Coming home from Reno the next day, we got sidetracked for 2.5 hours waiting on another train coming the opposite direction. That's when you get annoyed. When you're sitting along the sides of the track, can't get off the train, have no idea when you're going to start again. So that is, if that's still going on, that's something that's going to have to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that Caltrans has been in discussions with UP, so I know that that's one of the things they're looking at is can passenger rail kind of be supported alongside of UP's operations as well.
Having been a train passenger from Sac to Bakersfield a lot a couple of years back, it seems like, I think Amtrak is just second fiddle, right? They have no choice. So unless they can solve that problem, which I don't see how they will ever, but.
Well, this is a comment more than a question, but when we bring the Warren Miller Film Festival to Placer County, either in Auburn or Roseville, because we're gonna do that, that'll just,
Starring Corey and Mike.
all right? Sorry, Corey, Mike.
Auburn or Roseville? There were 2 other cities,
That's all right.
Actually, there are 4 other cities, but
You're right,
plenty of
you're right.
unincorporated also.
I don't know where the theater is in Rockland. You do have a theater though there in Lincoln.
yeah.
And I didn't say it was a annual event, so we could move around.
All right.
All right? Okay, boys. All right.
Priorities.
Oh, wait, it's a Sunset. It's at the Sunset Community. Where's Rockland Road? Where is it?
So any more comments by board members? Trinity, have anything? No?
Susan,
Oh, yes, please, please do.
Well, I don't have anything substantial to add other than I would be incredibly supportive of seeing this actually come to fulfillment.
Wonderful. Please.
yeah, so this is great that, PCTPA is getting some of this demographic and potential, public interest information to then sister up to the Caltrans more operational analysis that's going on. What's the expected timeline on the Caltrans work being completed?
So in terms of the study or in terms of actually getting like design started and
The study.
the study should be wrapping up within the next few weeks, I think, not a month.
And then do you expect that we'd be able to get the Caltrans representatives to give us a follow-up presentation here at PCTPA as to what some of their findings are?
I will look into that and we'll follow up on that.
Right, because I think that's really where that's the meat of the issue. I think the track capacity issue has always been the thing that, at least that I've heard as being the major constraint. I suspect dollars can solve that, but it's at $100 million, or is it $500 million? And I think, yeah, yeah, and you know, there is a second track. There used to be 2 tracks over at Honor Summit. One was removed. I suspect that what it would look like is money to increase track capacity between Auburn and Reno in exchange for more track time is really what the conversation is going to boil down to. And I think it's helpful for us to just look at that realistically, look at what those dollars are. I suspect that the dollars are going to be order of magnitude well above and beyond what PCTPA could ever take on, maybe more than the state could take on. And so I think it's going to require large influxes of state dollars and federal dollars, you know, to actually pull something like this off. And I think it's helpful to understand what that order of magnitude might be. I'm also curious as to what level of real participation Caltrans got from UP. I know when this effort was pursued maybe a dozen years ago, UP basically said, don't even talk to us. You're not serious. We're not going to waste our time on this conversation. And I'm curious if that dynamic has changed or not. So anyway, I understand that's more of related to the work that Caltrans is doing as opposed to the work that PCTPA is doing, but I think that's all going to be good information for us to have.
Sure. And I know that UP has been involved in a lot of the meetings and discussions, and I think you might be using some of their freight modeling to help kind of look at the operations along the corridor. Don't quote me on that, but I know that they have been involved more so than I know the last time there was a big to do, and they kind of stalled out with UP as well.
Right.
I think this time has been a little bit different. But yeah, so I can follow up on getting Caltrans out here for a presentation.
Okay, great. And as a couple of the fellow commissioners pointed out, there currently is passenger service on this corridor. It's just not very frequent and not particularly reliable. What's that?
The passenger service is really just that once a day.
Yeah.
You know, you have to stay overnight and then come back the next day.
Right.
Or in my case, I'd stay several days.
Right. So that's the other thing I'm curious about in terms
That's
of
your story
Caltrans.
anyway.
Yeah, I got stuck in Reno for the night. Yeah.
We were in Truckee.
Oh, Truckee, even better. Yeah.
It was actually fine.
Yeah. But I'm also curious as to what kind of frequency they were exploring. Right? Is it going from once a day to twice a day? Is it going from once a day to 8 times a day? Those would be details I'd be interested in.
Yeah. So they looked at 2 different scenarios. They looked at 2 additional round trips a day, and they looked at 6 additional round trips a day.
Okay.
And so essentially the meat of the study was, given those 2 scenarios, what improvements would we need to make more specifically at each station to make that happen? So like, for example, Colfax station would need to be double platformed in either scenario because of the way the trains would meet near Colfax. Whereas like Auburn and, you know, Roseville would need a double track if there were 6 round trips a day, for example. So that's those are the kinds of things that they were looking at in the Caltrans study.
Right. And do you know, is the working assumption that this would be an expanded Amtrak service, kind of like the Surfliner in Southern California, where it would basically be more Amtrak trains as the operator, or?
Yes, it would be an extension of the Capital Corridor. So the trains would begin in the Bay Area and continue on up to Reno.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Well, Dan, you prompted a lot of questions. So I'm thinking, rope drops about 9 a.m. What time do I have to leave Roseville to get there? I'll probably have to leave at 3 a.m.
No, probably 4.
It's I believe it's about a 4.
Oh, just 4, okay.
I think it's about a 4-hour ride.
Now, my question embedded in there was that you got the qualitative results out of those, but you didn't really drill down to, would you be willing to get up at 2 a.m. to pack up and get to the train station
So
and
we
be on a train longer than it would take you to drive there, right?
We did give travel times between
did?
stations. Yes, we did. We didn't say like, would you be willing to get up at 2 a.m. to get there by 9 a.m. But we said from Sacramento to Reno, it's this amount of time. From San Jose to Reno, it's this amount of time. So yeah, that was included in the survey.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Very informative.
Yeah, that was a good report.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the executive director's report.
All right, you can bring it home here. So just as a reminder, I think we talked about this last month, but just so we all know, next month there'll be no April board meeting. We're conflicting with us going to cap. Really, we have been preparing for a productive cap-to-cap trip. I attended the Placer planning meeting for cap-to-cap yesterday. Some of you were there as well. We will participate as part of the larger cap-to-cap transportation team. That first meeting is this Friday. There's a 1-hour teleconference. I think Mayor Joyner, you're on that as well. I know for sure. And then as a reminder for those going, we're going to be having a business meeting on Saturday morning, the 22nd, with TFG. That is our new federal advocate whose contract you approved on the consent agenda. Mike Miller, their principal, who will be our point of contact with TFG, and myself will facilitate a 90-minute session with the board. Just thinking off the cuff here, if there's anything you want to talk about specifically or make sure Mike's prepared for to answer, if you all just want to send me a note or call or whatever you want to do, I can make sure I've got my own thoughts on what I'd like him to cover. But if there, we've got a month, so if there's something like, hey, I'd like to spend 10 minutes talking about X, just send me something and I'll make sure we do that. But we're really excited to have TFG on board. That's the new branding for the Ferguson Group, so that's our new one.
I'm on the waiting list for the cap-to-cap trip, so if
Okay.
anybody has any influence over the Sac Metro Chamber, could you please?
So I just heard of 2 people that were booked to go who have canceled. You may want to
You
reach out
should,
real
yeah.
fast.
Well, my city just approved it, so I just reached out to them 2 days ago, so.
There's 8 people on the wait list, so
Oh, there are 8?
jump in quick.
Okay, I'll contact her.
Yeah, bug 'em.
Yeah. Thanks.
So then I wanted to, and we'll then start to continue with some cadence, give all of you an update on sort of our funding measure activities that we're working on. You also, as part of consent, approved 2 firms that are assisting the strategic team, Threefold, who's doing the strategic communications and marketing, and then FM3 for some of the quantitative stuff that we'll be doing periodically over the next, basically 18 months. So we as a team are having weekly strategy meetings. We held 2 focus groups. It's probably been about 3 weeks ago now that Mike Costa and myself attended. And those focus groups were with swing voters and soft no voters. And it was to sort of like Corey's survey results, but on a much smaller fashion, talk to them about what their priorities are generally to understand what would get them excited or get them to be more positive about a funding measure vote, as well as starting to test some of the creative messaging. So we've already kicked that off. We've also started having some one-on-one sit-downs with some folks to talk about the measure in earnest. And Chair Jones, if you don't mind me announcing, you'll be holding a conversational coffee meeting on Saturday, the 15th, with some of your constituents. We appreciate your participation. So just want to give you an update generally that we're basically starting to really gear up our sort of media strategy, our media buys, and our ground game around the funding measure. And happy to take any questions. That's the end of my report for this month.
Very good. Any questions? Okay. Move on then. Board direction to the staff. Okay. Then there's informational items, and the next meeting will be May 24th, 2023. Our regularly scheduled meeting in April 26th is canceled.
Madam Chair, before we adjourn, SACOG has a strategy that they are going to begin holding their meetings in jurisdictions that they represent. And on April 20th, they'll be coming to Placer County. The meeting will be at the Boys and Girls Club in downtown Roseville. So, I think, what time is it? Not that phone.
Should be 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, usual time?
Is it 9:30?
The meeting invite was sent at 9:30.
Okay. So that's part of the,
There is no last mile solution there though, right? You're parking at the Methodist Church and hiking several blocks.
there is no last, I'll be,
Interesting. SACOG does that. There's no scooters, there's no bike share.
I'll be operating a bike shuttle.
There you go.
You know, one of those,
Yeah?
Little bike taxis?
yeah, bike taxi, that's
know
the
what?
word I was looking for.
I would pay for
You
that.
need to borrow a
Yeah,
golf
no,
cart from
you
someone.
will be paying for it because I don't bike for free.
Okay, and if there's nothing further to be heard before
Thank you,
this
Madam
meeting,
Chair.
you're welcome. Meeting is
Very good.
adjourned.
That was a